Sword Art Online. Where to begin with such a series? I remember when it was first coming out all those years ago, and it was widely regarded as one of the best anime out there. A few years later, it became one of the most hated anime, and a few years after that, nobody seemed to care anymore. Just a silly little series to make fun of every now and again. So, what do I think about the series? All in all, it's pretty terrible. Which is a shame because it's got great animation, fantastic music, and one of the best isekai settings I've ever seen in an anime. But instead of capitalizing on the good aspects the series set up, it became a terrible romance anime with a harem, which young me found really confusing since I've never had any experience with the multiple love interest stories, especially ones of that nature, as well as never really capitalizing on the development of its characters, rather just really inane plots that don't go anywhere. However, despite all of that, SAO holds a special place in my heart. To cut a long story short, I watched the Gun Gale arc when I was alone and about to face something really scary in my life, so I really do have a soft spot for SAO after all these years, and specifically the Gun Gale arc in particular. And as such, I wanted to try and tackle something from the series, specifically this concept. If you die in the game, you die in real life. Now, you may be wondering, Orion, the series already answers how they die in real life when they die in the game. Why aren't you tackling such a topic? And that, dear viewer, is why I wanted to pose my own question. Could the nerve gear, or full dive system, or whatever other type of gaming apparatus they got going on in the series, actually trick the brain with only in-game stimuli into thinking it perished? In essence, my question is similar to, could a dream really kill you? Some disclaimers to begin with. I'm not too concerned with the engineering of the nerve gear and how exactly it affects the brain. That's because I'm a biologist and my summary of such complex equipment would be woefully inadequate. So I'm going to be focusing more on the brain and how it is affected by the nerve gear rather than the nerve gear itself. That is because it's my belief that to answer my question is more so a matter of the biology of the brain and less about the capabilities of the nerve gear. And I do realize that nerve gear was only used during the Aincrad arc and they changed systems throughout the different arcs. So I apologize if I use nerve gear a bit flippantly throughout this video. Now, let us discuss the basic biology of the brain. So the brain can be divided into a variety of different parts, but I'm going to keep it simple for the sake of this video. You have the cerebrum, the massive larger pink part of the brain, and the cerebellum, the little brain that sits in the back. The cerebrum contains two vital portions for the nerve gear to mess with. The occipital lobe, responsible for processing visual stimuli, and the motor cortex, which does exactly what the name implies. Additionally, the cerebellum works in cahoots with the motor cortex in order to coordinate voluntary muscle movement. So the nerve gear would have to intercept signals from these portions of the brain in order to isolate the player within the virtual world. Otherwise, their body would be caught up with the movement and stimuli from the outside world, thus ruining the virtual world experience. In order to do this, let me talk about nerve signals. Nerves, as you probably know, are cells in the body that are responsible for communicating commands from the brain to the rest of the body. Commands such as movement, sensory information, and the release of hormones. The basics of this process is due to what is known as an action potential. Action potentials are ion gradients on either side of the cell wall that is then propagated down the length of the cell. In essence, it's an electrical signal sent from the brain into the spinal cord and down to whatever body part is receiving the command. If you want to know more about action potentials, I speak more in detail on this in my Code Geass video. So with this in mind, a signal from the brain is a physical command that can be intercepted and interpreted by computers, particularly the nerve gear in this case. And each command is unique in its location and direction, allowing the AI in the nerve gear to recognize the difference between commands from the brain when the AI is trained to do so. These basic principles are what allow SAO's virtual worlds to exist. The brain sends a command, the gear intercepts that command, preventing the body from actually moving, and transmits whatever command it intercepted into the virtual world, where your avatar will move in accordance to what the AI recognizes that command to be. And since the gear has the ability to intercept commands from the brain, it can also input commands. Well, less commands, and more along the lines of stimuli. The nerve gear would send these signal stimuli through the sensory nerves, and I believe Kayaba Akihiko, the creator of Sword Art Online within their universe, would be particularly interested in nociceptors, which are responsible for the process of pain. Training the nerve gear AI to recognize certain stimuli would allow it to send that stimuli through the body's sensory receptors, allowing the player to feel something akin to a real-world sensation. Sensations such as the feeling of grass between your toes, or the feeling of wind on your face, or even the feeling of a sword piercing your thorax, your lungs filling with blood as you drown. So, if the nerve gear is capable of transmitting such information to the brain, can the gear send a meet your maker command, thus ending the player permanently? Well, let's talk about what the nerve gear can do. It can send sensory inputs into the brain, allowing the players to feel the world of Minecraft and other games too. To do this, the gears, or would it technically be the games? Either way, the AI would have to be trained to recognize how humans process certain stimuli, as I mentioned before. As I understand, this is accomplished by hooking a human up with electrodes to a computer with the AI in question. This human would then be stimulated by various different aspects of the world of Minecraft, such as grass, bricks, steel, wind, and any other characteristic they want the player to feel. The AI would then recognize these stimuli and what they're associated with, so it can then replicate that within the nerve gear. Now this is where things get interesting. Kayaba Akihiko, wanting to create the most realistic world he possibly could create, would then have to use human experiences to train his AI to simulate wounds and pain. This would involve subjecting individuals hooked up to his AI to such things like wolf bites, sword wounds, and other such harmful stimuli, so the AI could replicate those sensations in game. Which, in all honesty, is pretty messed up. But knowing Kayaba, I wouldn't really put it past him to conduct such research. But I'm not entirely sure if he would be virtuous enough to do it on himself or subject other people to such pleasant stimulation. So, given all that we have covered in this video, can the SAO AI, or nerve gear, or game, actually trick your brain into turning off? And the conclusion is not as far as I'm tracking. No, it is not capable of killing you with stimuli. It could suspend the brain in a comatose-like environment or even simulate death. However, it simply can't send a shut-off signal to the brain. And that's because the nerve gear only sends sensory stimuli to the brain. And no amount of stimuli is ever going to just cause the brain to shut off. It may overwhelm it, it may cause it to retreat, but the brain will continue its function irregardless of what signal it receives. And that's because blood will continue to be pumped to the brain. The brain will still maintain its more basic functions and keep itself alive. So the nerve gear won't be able to end the brain's functions, but can most certainly mess with a player and destroy their psyche if deprived of basic stimuli and intense amounts of pain. I do apologize. I was hoping to see if this hypothesis of mine would pan out, but as I did research for this, all roads pointed towards no. So I'm not going to bend what I understand to fit my own narrative. However, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a thing or two about how the brain functions, and how an AI can be integrated with the body. In the meantime, it's time to see if you really are what you eat. Take care, everybody, and God bless.